get the screen shared.
Is right is no, but right is forward, back.
Right is forward,
Okay,
back,
good enough.
and then you'll just have to speak.
Great. Okay. All right, welcome everybody. This session is called Achieving Zero Starts with Youth. And as we've seen from so many people, everybody is very committed to reducing deaths and injuries to zero, and we all have a part to play. This particular session is about why we must address youth, and a lot of people have already touched on it. This I completely stole from the visionzeronetwork.org, and it's the traditional approach versus the Vision Zero approach. But what I want to draw attention to is the bottom line: perfecting human behavior versus integrating human failing in approach. Now, of course, integrating human failing in approach is very important, but perfecting assumes that we started with very good behavior, and that isn't the case. Canada is very proud, and Ontario specifically, of our road safety record in North America. And we have a very good record in North America. I mean, we're way above the US, and we've worked hard for that. However, if you look at the world, Canada's way down. And this is 2018 data, because we don't have any published data since then. So we have a long way to go. And we heard on Sunday that the European countries who are way ahead of us already feel they have a long way to go. So we are not as great as we think we are. The Governor's Highway Safety Association in the United States recently did a report called Putting the Pieces Together, Addressing the Role of Behavioral Safety in the Safe System Approach. And this is an excerpt from it. The fact is that it will take time to create a system that accommodates human error and where crashes are within the tolerance of human injury when they occur. Sweden's been working on safe system for 25 years, and they are still doing behavioral programs. And that's what this session is about. Teens have always been high risk. They have an immature brain. The human brain doesn't mature until about age 25. And prior to that, they're very prone to risk. The part of the brain that says, hey, wait a minute, is not developed yet. And they lack experience. Plus, driving is very complicated. In Canada, we have 4 seasons, sometimes in a week, multi-lane highways. The 401 is officially the busiest highway in North America with up to 16 lanes of traffic. We have wildlife, construction zones, bumper-to-bumper traffic, emergencies, and day versus night. Plus, there's so many vehicles we have to share the road with. We have scooters now, distracted pedestrians, motorcycles, bicycles, e-bikes, skateboards, snowplows, trucks, streetcars, school buses, and emergency vehicles. It's complicated. If we look at the Road Safety Annual Report for 2020, we can see that in Canada, fatalities already started rising in 2015. And we know from everything we've heard here, even though we haven't pulled formal data yet, that police and other groups are very concerned about where we're headed in 2021, 22. So here we are in June 2022, and we're halfway through the year. Right now, we're seeing a lot of road events. It may be post-pandemic fatalism, we're all going to die anyway, or maybe euphoria, yippee, it's over. But all kinds of events focused on vehicles with record attendance, and young people are a big part of that. I talked to one young guy who said, well, hell, they've been working on their cars for 2.5 years. Of course they want to show them off. Then we have a generation that's grown up with movies like The Fast and Furious. That franchise started in 2001. So these kids have had it all their lives. Then we have video games like Grand Theft Auto, and they've spent the last 2.5 years online. So an unprecedented inundation with this kind of information. Plus, you have YouTube and social media with videos like how to activate drift mode on your car and tips and tricks for drifting. A lot of emphasis on risky behaviors and extreme speed. Something else that's unique to this generation is they are prone to distractions. They rely on digital communication. I'll talk to my team, who I'll tell you about in a little bit, but they're all young adults. And I'll say, well, you know, we haven't heard from him. Why don't you call? Call? No, I'll send him a text. Nobody picks it. They are very reliant, very social, but very reliant on digital communication. They also depend on technology to navigate. My daughter can be 3 blocks from home and use the GPS to find her way home. Plus, they've had bad role models. Their parents have grown up using their phones and being distracted while they're driving. And then plus all kinds of nonsense that I invite you to take a look at YouTube for, because it's incredible what young people are doing. Then you have social media challenges. In the upper left-hand corner, there's this Jackass show. I watched about 4 minutes of it, and I truly do not recommend it to anyone. But in the upper left-hand corner, there's a fellow who tried to use a skateboard to jump over a vehicle. And he missed and broke both legs, but there he is in the hospital. And the next guy is even worse. The 2 of them were driving in the car. He was driver. He says to the passenger, grab the wheel. He goes out the window over the top of the car while it's moving into the passenger seat, and they do it again, so they end up in the same position. The very next video in the playlist is a woman lamenting how sad it is that that man died in the car. Speed. This challenge is put your cell phone on the seat next to you and go fast enough that the cell phone stays against the back of the seat. There are lots of videos on car surfing, all kinds of showing up things for zigzagging in and out of traffic. And then, of course, drifting and racing is everywhere. Now, cannabis is legal in Canada. There's great information on the Government of Canada website. Nobody is looking there. But right underneath it, 1 million+ views for beaverbud.com. And they say a number of studies suggest that driving high may be associated with a mild to moderate increase in motor vehicle accident risk. However, most of these studies are incomplete or confounded with other accident risk factors. What is the bottom line message from that? All kinds of misinformation. Plus, we have vehicles that will move at higher speeds, and semi-autonomous vehicles with adaptive cruise control, lane departure warnings, blind spot detection, and the overall sense that my car will keep me safe. I don't have to worry about it. My car will keep me safe. Plus, through all these car shows and everything, cars are sold with sex. Young girls, half dressed, kind of lying all over the vehicles. I mean, what young man wouldn't respond to that? Seatbelts and airbags. Seatbelts are the main thing that will separate a crash from a fatal crash. And so much misinformation. Feet on the dashboard. Every time I see that, I cringe, and I see it a lot. The young lady in the middle there is riding in the trunk with her cell phone, talking to the passengers, letting them know what her ride is like. Large families with a small sedan. And the overall belief that you don't have to buckle up in the back seat because the front seat will keep you safe. And then learning to drive. In 2019, in Ontario, 38% of new drivers, according to MTO data, took a formal driver education course. That means 62% did not. So who are they learning to drive from? Well, parents and relatives, friends, who may not have the best skills to begin with, and then online. And I'm going to walk you through this slide. On the far right, the circled part, This is a driving instructor who does his advertising online on social media. I taught a 16-year-old how to drive in 2 hours. And the next slide was she's ready for the test. Yeah, exactly. On the far left, demonstrating an emergency stop. The driver is a young driver. He's staring straight ahead the whole time. The instructor holds up his hand and says, stop, and he slams on the brakes. That is not an emergency stop. And the one in the middle there is telling students how to judge the distance their vehicle is from an object by standing directly in front of the car. My favorite is the one at the bottom there, where the instructor, with almost 1 million views, is showing how to make sure that the steering wheel came back to the neutral position by putting a rope around the steering wheel and then, of course, turning it so now it's cinched around your neck. That could go wrong in so many ways. And that's just the start of the craziness. And then we have anti-law enforcement, anti-enforcement. And that is that even when people are ticketed, you have groups like ex-copper and lawyers and videos online telling you how to get out of the penalties. And parents, the number one I hear from parents is our insurance will go up. So of course we're going to get a lawyer to take care of that. I talked to one mom recently who is very in tune with youth safety in so many ways. But she said to me, she was driving with her son, who just got his license, and he was speeding. And she said to him, you know, you're going to get a ticket. And he said, oh, Mom, you know, I got my license. I'm good. Well, sure enough, he not only got a ticket, he got 2 tickets within the week. And so she said to him, I told him, you have to pay for the lawyer for that. Like, what's the lesson learned, right? So we have all of those stacked risks, beginning with the immature brain, inexperience, everything else. On the countermeasure side, we have GDL, but a lot of parents, even people I've asked in this room, don't know what the rules are. We have a written test, but it identifies signs and rules. It isn't situational. We just shortened the road test. The G1 exit test, the first road test, is 15 to 20 minutes. I've had students report to me they've taken it in as little as 8 minutes. It is when they are absolutely the most focused they will ever be, with no distractions, and that's how they're learning, they're getting their license. Enforcement is great, but they can't be everywhere. I mean, I don't have time to kind of read through all of them, but we are doing a crap job. Ultimately, this creates the perfect storm. We are in a much worse place than we have been in the past, and it is not going to get any better. So I'm going to ask you to hold your questions until the end, and I'm going to first introduce our first speaker, who is Robyn Robertson. A lot of you already know her. She is a mainstay of road safety and has been for a long time. Robyn is the president and CEO of TIRF, the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, and holds a Master of Criminology applied degree. You can read the rest of it online. She is amazing and a real expert in this. And I'm just going to turn it over to her. So you can change that, thank you.
I always like to start my presentations with applause. It's always a nice start.
That one there?
Yeah. There we go. Sure. So I'm really going to be talking about building on what Anne-Marie said. I'm going to show you how it plays out in the numbers when it comes to fatal crashes. And it's not a good news story. Because the progress, we're not really making the progress that we should, and we're at a place where we can go either way at this point. And I think what we do collectively in this room and with our partners will influence that immensely. So for those of you not familiar with our organization, we're an independent road safety research institute and a registered charity. We have been around for a little more than 50 years. I have not been there for the whole 50 years. And we do a couple of different things. We maintain Canada's national fatality data, collecting medical examiner and coroner data to look at alcohol and drug impairment, among other risky behaviors. And that's a core foundational piece of what we do. We're also very much involved in program and policy development. Many of you are familiar with graduated driver licensing programs, and we've been involved in those for more than 3 decades. Also a lot of program and policy evaluation. And then the most important thing we do is spend our time with practitioners to help them use the research and to accelerate progress in the real world. So I have the benefit of spending a lot of my time working with criminal justice, with health, and with transportation officials, not just in Canada, but across the US and in a number of different countries, to help them use the research so we can make progress faster. The vision of our organization for a very long time has been about eliminating deaths and injuries on our roads, and our mission is really to be the knowledge source. So we say we don't save lives, we do create the knowledge and share it with individuals who do save lives every day. So I'm going to talk about fatal crash data and teens, and looking at 2 different groups of young drivers, the 16 to 19-year-olds and the 20 to 24-year-olds, because there are some important differences there, and really look at some of the main contributing factors in fatal crashes and to what extent they have implications for young drivers, and then touch briefly on some of the emerging trends, which I think some of our other panelists are going to speak to in more detail. So we all know that young drivers are overrepresented in fatal crashes. Their highest crash risk is in their first 6 months of licensure, and that's largely because of age and inexperience. And they also are very much challenged with important skills like hazard detection. We do have a number of driver education and graduated driver licensing programs across North America and in a number of other countries. And certainly the most recent research shows important safety benefits, but till now, it's driver education is not mandatory in many jurisdictions, and GDL programs are implemented to varying degrees. And some of the most important and effective pieces of graduated driver licensing programs are nighttime restrictions and passenger restrictions. And we see that jurisdictions are more reluctant to really toe the line on what works when it comes to those particular features. So in the past 5 years, we looked at data from 2015 to 2019. On average, we've seen it holding steady with about 16% of young drivers killed in fatal 16% of drivers killed in fatal crashes were in the 16 to 24 age range, and about 6% are the 16 to 19, and the remaining 10% are the 20 to 24-year-olds. So when I say they're overrepresented, that's because those age groups represent about 11% of the population. There's not really a good data source to see what percentage of the driving population they represent. So that's what we know. When it comes to safety equipment, we often like to think that young people buckle up and are more likely to buckle up. And when we're looking at those drivers involved in fatal crashes who are younger, we see that that's not necessarily the case. So less than 2/3 of young drivers in fatal crashes actually used safety equipment such as seatbelts or helmets, compared to all ages of drivers. So it was about 65% for 16 to 19-year-olds and 64% for 20 to 24-year-olds, whereas when you look at all ages, it's about 72%. When we talk about drivers testing positive for alcohol in fatal crashes, we see that our youngest age group, the 16 to 19, are less likely to be positive for alcohol compared to all ages, but the young adult drivers are more likely to be positive. So it's like that message they get about don't drink and drive lasts right up until they turn 20, and then it seems to go out the window. So a little more than a quarter of 16 to 19-year-olds were positive for alcohol, but it was actually a little over 42% for 20 and 24-year-olds, compared to about 30% for alcohol in fatal crashes, drivers in fatal crashes. We've been holding at about 30% for a while, although the overall numbers are coming down. So this is just another way of looking at alcohol use in fatally injured drivers by age group. Now, when we're talking about drugs, it's a little bit different. In fatal crashes, we have a much higher prevalence of drugs, and these are drivers who test positive for drugs. We can't make a determination about impairment, but they are positive for one or more drugs. So among 16 to 19-year-olds, more than 40% of fatally injured drivers test positive for drugs. Higher at 50% for 20 to 24-year-olds, and in the middle there for drivers of all ages at just under 47%. So again, another way of looking at that. And we talked this morning, Jeff Brubaker talked a little bit about polysubstance use, and we certainly see that in young drivers, in all drivers in fatal crashes. So for the youngest drivers under age 24, you're more likely to see alcohol and cannabis. For drivers over age 25 who are polysubstance, you're more likely to see alcohol and stimulants or alcohol and depressants. So there are some differences. And to quote my colleague Steve, the winner of the fatally injured driver sweepstakes, in terms of how many drugs, they were positive for 5 categories of drugs. And that was cannabis, depressants, stimulants, alcohol, and I forget, narcotic analgesics. So they couldn't make up their minds, so they decided to do a little bit of everything. But we do definitely see polysubstance. And when you're looking at drivers testing positive for cannabis, a majority of them have other substances on board. It's not just cannabis. And that's very comparable with the arrest data. So again, just looking at the different drugs of choice among different age groups of drivers killed in road crashes. So cannabis was really most common in drivers under 44. Depressants were 45 and older. And then when you look at that second category, stimulants were a close second after cannabis. And again, different categories for our older drivers, which is where you see the narcotic analgesics more. Okay, so this is cannabis specifically. So you can see that as people age, you're less likely to find cannabis in fatally injured drivers. So a bulk of our problem is really in the under 44 category. And that's important to understand for things like interventions and education campaigns and messaging and the mechanisms we use to reach people. But again, cannabis is present across all ages of drivers, more in the younger age groups, but 22%, when you look at all ages combined, 22% of fatally injured drivers tested positive. So not a good news story when it comes to impairing substances. And I think many of the presenters today have highlighted that. Looking at some of the other important contributing factors in fatal crashes, distraction is a key one. We know from fatal crash data, just under 1 in 4 fatal crashes involve distraction as a contributing factor. Distraction was most prevalent among our youngest age groups of drivers, but less prevalent in the 20 to 24-year-old category. So again, when we're talking about distraction, important differences in age groups to be considered. Speeding, a larger portion of younger drivers exceed the speed limit or drive too fast for conditions compared to drivers of all ages. So as we get older, we get a little smarter, a little more cautious, and a little less comfortable with risk. When it comes to fatigue, it's very difficult to detect fatigue for important reasons, but we see across age groups, it's fairly consistent in terms of prevalence among drivers killed in road crashes. So some of the emerging trends that may either help us or hurt us, one is some young drivers are delaying licensure for a couple of different reasons. One, they may have access to public transportation and they're more comfortable with ride sharing applications. And the other one is they do want to avoid peer pressure from their friends, egging them on to drive distracted, to speed, to not wear their seatbelt and drink and drive. Something that may not help us is, as a result of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of jurisdictions move out of sheer necessity to online driver education programs, and that's been true across the US. And some of the jurisdictions previously prohibited online driver education programs for important reasons. Generally, these programs are not well evaluated, and most concern among the young driver community is that these programs are here to stay, and we don't know whether or not they're effective, and they will do the same job as your traditional modern driver education programs. Some of the other things that may hurt us is we have seen risk-taking increase across the board, not just in Canada and the US. And we did 2 polls, our road safety monitor in Canada and the US, both showed increases in risk-taking. In Canada, it was more speed and distraction, and in the US, it was more speed and impairment, followed by distraction. But there is some data to suggest during the pandemic, we have more younger people driving, and are more risk-averse population of drivers are less likely to be on the road, and that may be part of the explanation in some of that data. And to Anne-Marie's point, we are seeing jurisdictions compress the on-road driving test, again, out of sheer necessity to deal with backlogs. And this has been a temporary measure. It has been extended, and it begs the question, as with online, will it continue to be extended, and what implication does that have? So in terms of key takeaways, are 16 to 24-year-olds killed in road crashes are less likely to use safety equipment, more likely to use cannabis, and more likely to speed than other age groups. But for alcohol and drug use, our 16 to 19-year-old drivers were below average, whereas our 20 to 24-year-olds were above, suggesting that we're missing a connection in there as they turn 20. And then 16 to 19-year-old drivers, again, had above average scores for distraction and fatigue, but the 20 to 24-year-old had scores that were lower than the percentage for all ages. So we have lots of resources on our website. We have blogs if you're looking for current talking points. We're releasing a young driver vodcast, and we also did one in partnership with Anne-Marie in the next few weeks. We do have our Young and New Driver Resource Center, which is going through a major update. And the last thing I want to share with you, sorry, these are education programs, lots of them. And this is our team. So the work that we do at TIRF is really a team effort. So many of you know Steve there in the yellow shirt, who manages our fatality data. So he was kind enough to pull some of the data and put it together for me today. And that's it. I'll leave you there.
Okay, so next we have Sylvia Larke, who is the project coordinator for Weed Out the Risks. She knows more, I'm not going to read from this, you can look at online, but she knows more about young people and cannabis, their attitudes, their beliefs than pretty much anybody else because of the amount of exposure she's had. And so I really hope you'll listen to her, because I know firsthand too that young people have a lot of misconceptions and a lot of really bad information. So Sylvia Larke.
Thank you. The purple color. All right, thank you. So today has, well, I should say the last few days have had some pretty depressing elements. We've learned a lot about the fatality risks, about how youth are living in the perfect storm between distraction, social media, all these things. And we're left kind of feeling a little bit, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of work to do. And it's kind of motivating because it puts us in a place where we know that, you know, there's a lot to be done and we have that motivation. But at the same point, I want to make sure that we leave the session today with a little bit of hope. And so what I'm going to do today is, instead of going through all the details of Weed Out the Risk, I mean, the overall synopsis It's a 1-hour workshop, harm reduction. We use games, activities, discussions, all sorts of fun things to educate youth on the risks of cannabis-impaired driving. But what I want to do now is actually give you guys a presentation similar to what I would do with the youth. And that way you can leave today having a sense of the kind of education youth are receiving on cannabis and driving. And perhaps there's some things you can take from the way that I'm explaining and talking about the subject and how that can be used with the youth that you might serve in your professional field or on a personal aspect as starting the conversation. It's high time to do so. So, oh, sorry. Right. I'm going to stand down here because no one can see me up there. I'm a head shorter than most people, which is generous. Yeah. But can I keep going or should I pause? Okay, so what we need to do to have a little bit of fun today is we're going to make this interactive. I mean, keep in mind, I'm condensing a 1-hour workshop into probably like 9 minutes left. So we'll try to make this work. It's the first time I've done it. So you guys are the guinea pigs. But put on a hat right now, as I will, that you are 14, 15, 16, you're in a high school classroom, and maybe you drove to school today high. Think of someone you know who you got in the car with this past weekend who is high. What kind of circumstances do youth in that age group find themselves in? And I am going to now present to you in that kind of way. So my job is to go into schools and educate students on the risks of cannabis-impaired driving. And yes, I do it for a living, but I actually have a personal aspect to it. And that is that my partner was almost killed in a cannabis-impaired driving collision. They got into a car with somebody who was high on cannabis. They had no idea. And they decided that it would be okay to weave in and out of traffic, lost control of the car, and it did a 360-degree turnaround. It was in that moment that I realized that I had a very personal investment into the work that I do today. So some of the most common misconceptions that I hear in the workshops from students are these listed here. But have you guys heard of any other popular misconceptions about cannabis and driving, or any thoughts you might have on the risks of cannabis and driving? Yeah. It doesn't smell. Yeah, that's a good one, right? And sure, if it's a vape, you might not notice it as much as smoking, or if it's an edible, it's not going to smell as much as like a joint would, right? So valid to some point, but it doesn't mean police can't still detect it. So I drive better high. It's not as bad as alcohol, and the police can't tell if I smoked. So what I'm going to do is try and debunk all of these misconceptions, and I hope in the next 5 minutes, your minds are changed. All right, so I drive better high. If you didn't have an effect from weed, then you wouldn't be using it. You obviously choose it to have some sort of feeling. We're going to take a look at this video of somebody else who thought that they would drive better high.
Burrito run! Who's in? I want to do that!
You don't have to literally
Let's do
run.
burrito run.
They're eggs on weed, and we all agree they've got no idea where this is going to lead.
I know what they say, but there are benefits to driving high.
Yeah, like focus benefits.
We're keeping it safe.
Wait. We're been focused, man. Yeah.
Is that a word?
Yeah, because we're doing it right now. We're better focusing. Hello.
Hey, I'm so benefocused that I deserve like a medal or like a crown and a scepter or something with my name on it.
Wait, what?
All right, so when you drive high, you're 5 times more likely to hit things. Starting out smoking weed and getting into the car, you might not think it's that big of a deal. You might even get a few blocks and nothing bad happens. But don't use that as your measurement that it's okay. Just because something bad has not happened before doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. So what are some of the ways that THC actually affects your ability to drive? So I'm going to break it down into 3 critical areas of the brain that are most affected from cannabis use. The first is the basal ganglia. Now, this is one of the reasons why people get high, is because it controls your muscle movement, meaning that it makes you more relaxed, slower to noticing things going on in the road. It makes you more chilled out, which is why people use it. But on the road, it's going to make you a much worse driver, right? With all the things that we have going on, especially on Canadian roads, ice, things like that, you're going to be less likely to notice things that you need to on the road. It gives you that tunnel vision where you miss what's going on around you. The hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for short-term memory, right? And that's kind of the notorious stereotype of people who smoke a lot of weed, that they have bad short-term memories. But this is really dangerous on the road. You forget that you're supposed to take that exit. Even the drive home, that is usually, you know how to get there, no problem. But when you're high, things that come naturally to you don't come as easily. And this is where things can get dangerous. Remembering who's driving around you, the steps you have to take to switch lanes, those sorts of things. The cerebellum. So what the cerebellum does is it controls your coordination. So when you are switching lanes, you need to make a quick decision to move on the road, it's going to affect your ability to do that safely. So these are some of the ways that, though you might think or have the perception that you're a better driver when you're high because you're more chilled out, you're more relaxed, you care less, it doesn't actually make you a better driver according to the science. So we're going to take a look at this video. This is a video that we're going to have a little bit of a discussion on after, if we have time. And I will warn you, it does have a bit of a shocking ending. So if you don't feel like watching a crash ending, spoiler alert, then you can turn away.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. How about you?
Don't know really.
Yeah, we were talking about maybe going down to the pub and seeing some bands or something. So.
Yeah, I might do that. Yeah, that sounds good actually. Who's playing?
Hey, Mark. Come on, we gotta get going.
Now? Can't we stay a bit more?
No.
Yeah, all right, come on. Gotta go.
See ya.
You got the keys?
Yeah. Woo! No, you got them. Bye. Is it fun? God, she's so cute, Bella. She's like a wedding party. Can't believe we've got a kid.
Whole based.
Me too. It's clear, babe.
Oh.
Are you sure you should be driving?
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right, Mike, make up your mind. Is it fast or slow?
Okay, you drive.
Okay, so that was a crash ending. I'm sorry for the gasps. I'm sorry if I scared you. It's pretty dramatic, but that is the reality of impaired driving, that it is really dramatic. And when you're actually in that moment, imagine what that would feel like if that was someone you cared about. Now, impaired driving is not just a youth issue. I mean, Mark was very much an adult, right? He looks super old because you're all 16, right? And it's not just a youth issue, but it does, the conversation starts with you, and everyone at that party had a role to play in saying this person used, they might look fine. Don't judge somebody on the outside just because they look like they're okay to drive. He wasn't slurring his words. He wasn't visibly messed up. I wouldn't look at that guy and say, oh yeah, he's not capable of driving. But we just have to make the association that if you choose to use, you've got to disassociate driving in that same night, in that same time, right? They're two totally separate activities. If you choose to use, that's your choice. If you choose to drive, that's your choice. They just don't come together. They're two separate things. So what happens when we do make that mistake and get into the car with an impaired driver or decide to drive high? Well, there's a lot of consequences you might not realize. So first off, you get pulled over by the police, and this is the best case scenario, honestly. When you get pulled over by the police, you are risking a $1,000 fine, depending on where you are. You're subjected to drug recognition expert. So that's a police officer who's gone through additional training. They'll have to give you a test, can be a urine sample, can be, was once a saliva swab, but now it's the urine sample, as well as the blood sample and the roadside test, all of which are going to totally kill your plans on Friday night. I mean, you were planning on going to your friend's house or getting home from your friend's house and having a good time. And now you just have to spend it in the police station doing all this. You can have your car impounded. How's that phone call to your parents going to sound, right? You can get a criminal record. So that family vacation that you were planning across the border, you can say goodbye to that because nobody wants somebody in their country with a criminal record. Job applications, that scholarship that you were planning for. I mean, try and think of the things that you value. What is it that you value? Right? All the things that you value are going to be affected by this one decision. And so it's really not worth getting high for a few hours or however long it's going to affect you for. It's not worth that over hurting someone else, hurting someone in your community, hurting yourself. Now, when I end off on this, a lot of times people think about the legal consequences. And yes, the legal consequences, the financial consequences, they're a lot and they're not fun and they're all awful. But at the end of the day, I don't think that we should use the law as our guiding pillar of what's right and what's wrong. We need to look at things from a public safety position. Who's sitting beside you in the passenger seat? Who is it that you usually drive? Imagine what it would feel like to be responsible and living with the guilt of hurting them based off of your decisions, or yourself having to live with an injury because of a decision that you made one time, right? Thinking about the decisions that you make from a public safety perspective is going to serve you much more well than looking at simply these sorts of consequences that also exist. All right, and that's it. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so our next speaker is from the enforcement side. It's Sergeant Scott Hogan with Peel Regional Police. He has over 24 years of policing with Peel Regional Police as a uniformed constable, supervisor. He's done a lot of stuff. He's very involved in road safety. And we recently did a couple of videos with them for youth about the penalties for going 70 kilometers an hour in a 30. Because young people really don't get that's stunt driving. So here is Sergeant Scott Hogan.
Good afternoon. Okay, which one? Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. There are four main areas of concern which we've identified regarding youth in driving, which are impaired driving, seat belts, distracted driving, and speeding and stunting. And these are all from speaking to officers that I work with. There's been an increase, and I think other officers from Sudbury mentioned it too, by impaired by drug. A huge spike since once I started 24 years ago. Passengers are still getting in riding with drivers who have been drinking at young ages. And there's numerous calls for drivers smoking cannabis since the legislation came into effect. For seatbelts, unknown reasons why occupants don't wear the seatbelts. For the youth, perhaps they feel like they're untouchable, invincible. The main offenders are the rear passengers, and the most common excuse is they claim that they didn't know that the rear passenger had to wear the seatbelt. Distracted driving. The driving itself is a complex task, and with the internal distractions, the cars today are more technically advanced. The infotainment centers are only getting bigger and bigger. The Bluetooth, although it's helpful, it can lead to distraction from music playlists, hitting the screens, hitting their phones. And that adds with the lack of experience in driving. And the communication portion with the need to answer these text messages instead of just putting their phone down and responding to emails. Officers have caught young drivers, I should say, texting or on social media while driving. The younger generation is very attached to their phones. And as well, passengers are a big distraction in many ways for the level of noise, the talking within the vehicle, the movements and the actions of the passengers, and also the social environment in the car. If it's full of teens, maybe they're encouraged to take risks and show off. And the external, there's more traffic, more pedestrians out in the roads. Now, speeding and stunting. And the social media and media culture has changed. Facebook, which seems to be the old, then it was YouTube, TikTok now is the new, and the youth gravitate towards that, and it appears to consume in different ways. They're able to, the smartphones these days are able to record and upload it to whatever social media they want. It's that social media culture, which I think the Dr. Nicholas Ward mentioned about. It's part of their generation, Fast and the Furious, Grand Theft Auto. It encourages this copycat trend within the social media platform to gain, notoriety and likes or whatnot. And, the youth are just modifying their cars to be like the movies, essentially. And this is a video. How do I just click it? Okay.
Gotta run, man. We don't give a hell. Cops, no cops. We're street race, and that's the end of it.
We're meeting up with an underground racing community near the airport. Apparently, the maze of industrial roads in the area make it the best place to race because commercial flight paths make it impossible for police helicopters to fly.
If you wanted to see Fast and Furious in real life, this is about as close as you're gonna get.
That's just an example, and that's Toronto area. And this was done by Vice. I think it's a videographer that goes around, all on YouTube. So just more of speeding and stunting. The cars sportier, they handle better, and that with that inexperience and maturity play a factor as well. The risk takers and less cautious. At these meets that you saw there, they add GoPros to their vehicles to capture their driving experience, and they post it. Or you get, not only do you get drivers that are racing, but you get onlookers that bring their videos or cameras, like their phones, and just videotaping. Since I started, racing was always there, but it seems to have gotten more and more attention, whether it's Fast and the Furious, I don't know. But I've been pulled in to areas where they race, and I'd say in excess of 500 cars. And that's all, to gain, likes or making money. And the funny thing is, like my young son, one of them, he wanted to be a YouTuber when he grew up. So I was just great. But that's the generation. And this is how they post. They'll post something on, like say Instagram, a meet. They all have different monikers of their names or whatever, these racing communities. And they'll meet up. This one was in Welland, but they'll do a pre-meet, and then they'll decide which location they're going to go. From my officers, about 95% of the speeders they observe are between the ages of 18 to 28. They note an increase in racing and modified vehicles, and even more disturbing, the flight from police. The top excuses they get, late for work, on break. They believe that the charges don't really seem to faze the youth. They're more concerned about their cars being impounded. And a lot of these cars are in the parent's name. Another video. We got lots of videos.
When one driver cornered, slams into reverse.
Look at, he's trying to get away. Look at. There you go. Oh, he's flying. we are not pursuing.
Appreciate that, thank you.
So that was actually me at CBC Marketplace, do a ride along, and we were going to stop that car. I don't know if you could see it, but the plate, the driver actually blacked out the plate or had no plate. So that's what a lot of them do, or they're stolen vehicles, and they just take off. So that's why we initially tried locking it in, and sure enough, it took off.
Video that was recently posted to YouTube and Facebook, which shows numerous people performing wildly dangerous and illegal stunt driving acts. This sort of stunt driving is taking place at locations all across the city, and this is one of them. There's plenty of evidence to prove it. Just look at all these black tire marks on the parking lot of this Leaside shopping center. Residents near Laird and McRae have complained about the ear-piercing noise that wakes them up, but also that drivers often take over intersections surrounded by huge groups of people that block traffic.
It was the last week.
And here's one we filmed in Peel. People ducking out seconds after we arrive. Street racing is up all across Ontario since the pandemic began. With less people on the road, those looking for a thrill are taking to the streets, and that's causing a lot of problems, especially for those living by major arteries.
So here's some racing statistics. Between 2019 2021, 2,492 persons were charged with street racing stunting. 91% were males. Less than 18 years, 83 persons were charged, which is the 3% total. 18 to 29 was 1,678, which is 67%. And 44 persons charged with street racing on more than one incident. The repeat offenders charged with street racing more than once. 2019, one person was a repeat offender. 2024 and 2021, 18, which is 18 times. I don't know if that it would be because of COVID or the MUMS Act that came into effect that, you know, by the way, repeat offending. So in Peel, under the community safety and well-being model and initiatives, part of the prevention, do targeted enforcement, but also our strategic officers concentrate on high traffic collisions. So it's data collected where we have the most collisions, and they concentrate on enforcement in these areas. And it's also the visibility to reduce the number of traffic collisions. Road Watch, we learn from the community of any traffic related concerns, such as you know, a specific stop sign where someone's not stopping. Officers will go to that location and answer those complaints. Ride, which is we do the festive ride and the weekly ride to reduce impaired driving. Training, more courses are being implemented with the you know, standardized field sobriety tests. More officers are receiving this training and recognizing and arresting drug and impaired drivers. And then we have a race, which is the eliminate racing activity on streets everywhere. Every weekend, we designate officers to this enforcement. And that's the videos I've showed you that, you know, try to lower those numbers. And I can safely say that our numbers of street racing have gone down, I believe, compared to last year. This year, I haven't been out yet, but it did make a difference. And the teamwork with the race, we joined with York, OPP, and the neighboring Toronto collaborative effort to try to combat these racers. Social development and support, which PARC, Peel Addiction Assessment Referral Center for people who may be suffering for addiction. Every person arrested for impaired driving is referred to PARC. Education, we expand on it through campaigns, but there, I feel that there needs to be more for young drivers and passengers, and as well as parents. From reading some articles, I know in Michigan, apparently, they have adopted programs that help parents learn how to create safe driving environments for their teens and develop good driving skills, because there's so many examples where the parents they disagree. Their son's been charged with stunting and they disagree. Their son doesn't speed, which obviously prove wrong, but. So I think that's important for the parents. And risk mitigation, and Peel, Safer Roads team was developed, and it's made up of officers that do compliance checks on persons who may pose a potential risk to the community, that have had their license suspended due to dangerous driving, impaired driving, or a flight from police. This is a risk prevention. That is it.
So I hope you can see that we're trying to show you this from different perspectives. Our next speaker is Christine Raby, who is amazing. She began her career in driver training a long time ago. You can read the year, but she's been doing this for over 35 years. She has 9 locations in Niagara, and she is truly one of the good guys in an industry where the number of good guys is, in my opinion, somewhat limited. She is amazing. She's going to talk about driver education and the changes she's seen in the last 15 years. Christine.
Thank you, Emery. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel honored to be amongst all of you. I know that I've really gotten a lot out of the presentations over the last day and a half or so. I know that you guys are heavy on statistics, so I don't have a lot of statistics today. I have a feeling, my gut feeling and boots on the ground type of experience as to what we're seeing with our youth today. So I kindly just put down, how driver training has changed over the last 15 years, but technically I've been doing this way before graduated licensing system. And I love that, we are changing and we are evolving, but I just wanted to entice more change, and that more needs to be done to help with our youth. So teaching teens to drive more than just maneuvering. So it's kind of where the topic started. And one of the theme questions I always ask my classroom when I first start a class is, what is the most important safety feature in a car? And honestly, I stump every single class because they'll yell out a whole bunch of answers. I usually have a bunch of them, but ultimately it's the driver that is the number one safety feature in the car. And it blows their mind in the sense that I really want to impose on them the power and control that they have behind that wheel of the car. The environment doesn't, they can control the environment that they're in by how they drive and what the choices that they make. So really it's about, I try to let them understand that they are in control of how much risk that they take and that they need to make smart choices. I will hope to touch on all of these in the next few minutes, but if you think about learning how to drive has changed a lot in the last 15 years. I'm going to touch a little bit on all of these. However, over the last few presentations, there's lots of doubles in here. So I beg to, if you can hang in there with me. So let's talk about the infrastructure for a little bit and about the modern challenges. If you look about, even 15 years ago, what our streets look like, we had simple intersections, we had slower traffic, there was less traffic. People were still courteous to each other to a certain degree. We let people in, and then sharing the road with other road users was simpler back then. Today we have complex intersections with double turn lanes, multi-lanes, center left turn lanes, roundabouts. The speeds are higher out there. There's more traffic than ever before, and aggressive. Look at all the aggressive driving that's been going on in the last little bit. Sharing the road with other kinds of vehicles. Sure, we have experience with pedestrians and bikes, but now we have e-bikes and scooters, and we have double trucks and double buses, and all this stuff is very intimidating to a brand new driver. We have distracted driving, which we've talked about at length today, but what I really wanted to stress to you is the difference between teens 15 years ago were active participants as passengers. They sat up front with mom and dad and they paid attention to what was happening. They were driving to karate or driving to soccer, and they were kind of engaged with mom and dad. Then cell phones come in and we put the kids in the back seat in car seats. So now they're sitting in the back seat with their cell phone, watching a movie or doing whatever they're doing back there, but they're not paying attention. Riding their bikes. Once upon a time, little Timmy took his bike and he went to Johnny's house and he drove his bike to school and he went to work and we didn't think anything of it. And now in this day and age, we bubble wrap these kids and mom and dad are chauffeuring them from one location to the other, and they don't get to experience that traffic. Yesterday, I was watching a news report about infants between the ages of 1 and 4, and that drowning is the #1 cause of death for these students or these children in that age category. And they talked about how the pandemic stopped those swimming lessons and how they're going to be at great risk. And I thought, this is what's happening to our youth. Between the ages of 14 and 15 is very, very critical time for them to get that experience because they're getting excited about licenses. So now they're paying attention to what's happening on the road. And guess what? The last 2 years, they've been in their basement on their phone, doing a Zoom class or whatever the case may be. We've missed some critical time. So when Anne-Marie asked me to speak at this conference, I said, and she mentioned the perfect storm. And I said, you got that right. We have some major things going on right now that these youth, these new students, these new drivers have never had to face this before. We talked about technology in the cars. Right. So it's as an educator, we only have so much time. And my time was supposed to be focused on rights of ways and defensive driving and space control and all those type of things. So, and to add to that, now they have short attention spans. So it's, again, a perfect storm was a right way to describe this. Pedestrians and cyclists. Again, 15 years ago, we had Elmer the safety elephant. Harry Artinian was my hero. He really did a lot because he started teaching them from when they were a very young age about crossing the road and about bicycle safety and all that type of thing. And that is now missing from a very young age. Simple intersections and signals were the norm. Traffic was lighter. But today, Elmer has retired and Mr. Rogers has also, and that was a big loss as well. But culture implications is also new. The newcomers and the tourists, driving in other countries around the world is not the same as Canada. So they're coming in with different biases. And so we have to kind of overcome. Well, I know that's kind of how it's there, but over here it's a little bit different. We have heavy traffic. And I also want to mention the consistency between jurisdictions on just something as simple as bike lanes. They're not the same. If you look at how they handle bike lanes in Toronto and Hamilton, and then my area, which is St. Catharines and Niagara, and then so it's a little bit different to teach them how to drive in small town Canada when you know that they're going to be going into downtown Toronto. So next, we have the changing environments. So people, again, this is kind of being really simplistic, but back in the day, families only had one car. So everybody kind of drove together and they didn't go very far. They kind of stayed in their own little area. Keep in mind now, my 16-year-old is going to pass their license, on Tuesday. And then on Friday, mom and dad are going to give them the car and they're going to Toronto for a concert. So it's again, do they have the experience to do that? Today, people are driving long distances and teens often have their own cars. Even our environment, there's so much construction going around. I would imagine in your own areas, now we're having double turn lanes and we're having center left turn lanes and so on is coming out. Auto technologies. Simple vehicles. It was easy. 15 years ago, my car had an airbag and it had a seatbelt, and that was pretty much it. Now I could focus all of my attention on teaching this teen how to drive. And now we have different vehicles, right? Different safety features. And then we have to talk to them about the psychology of understanding that these safety features in your mom's BMW, just because she has a better car, doesn't mean that you can abandon all the defensive driving strategies that we just implemented. So Safety features were easy and understandable. Now new safety features give them a false sense of security. I was training somebody the other day and he says, I'm going to turn off the lane assist on my car when I do my road test because I don't want it to go against me. So, right. And then not all cars are the same. So that, between manufacturers and models, it just takes what we need to do and it complicates it that much more. The big one I really, really need help with is the driver's attitude. So again, it's the parents who are bubble wrapping these kids, except for when it comes to driving, right? When it comes to driving, they say, here, take driver's ed, and then they don't practice with them. So what makes a great driver is experience and exposure. We know that. It's pretty easy. And parents understand that when it comes to piano. If they were hiring a piano teacher, you would do a piano lesson and they would go home and practice for an hour every day. But guess what? Parents do not want to practice with their 16-year-old. They're scared, they're nervous, and they're like, that's why I'm sending them to driver training. Also, COVID and anxiety. Students were already coming in with high anxiety prior to COVID, more than we've ever seen before. And now you put them and you lock them away in the house for 2 years, not around other people, and that anxiety just went through the roof. So we know that they are delaying licensures at this point. So education, this is what I really want to kind of stress, is that parents really need to schedule time for practice, because we're going to show them what to do, and then it's their job to go ahead and perfect it. So parents were alert and focused as co-drivers, but driver education has gone through lots of changes, as Robyn mentioned, about e-learning and so on and so forth. We used to have one single curriculum, and we now are up to 40 different curriculums. So not all driving schools are created the same. And what happens is people then are shopping on price. If it's all the same and we all have the same criteria, but it's really in the delivery, it's in the secret sauce that's going to make the difference. But I think that our government could go further and try to help us out and try to encourage driver training. Basically, maybe as far as just even offering a tax credit. I don't understand why you can go to the local college and take a class on computer graphics and get a tax receipt, but you cannot get a tax receipt for driver training. I think that we need to do more. Quick question is, how many practice hours do you think a new driver will need before they attempt the road test? It's kind of a trick question when you think about it, because not all driving schools will teach in equal areas. So it's different if somebody was learning how to drive in Ottawa versus a population of 15,000 people. So it's experience and exposure. They need to be exposed to kind of all kinds of different traffics. We must put the focus back on the driver. Government, transportation, and health ministries need to help us with resources, funding, and focus. Assistance with awareness campaigns for teens, but also for parents, right? And so to let them understand that what their role is in helping that new driver. Teens and young adults need additional resources for driver education and incentives for taking the program, but also the carrot versus the stick. We need to get corporate sponsorships involved into trying, rather than always just, it's a penalty for this, it's a penalty for that. This is a new generation of students that will ask themselves, what's in it for me? Why should I do the right thing? So if we can sort of incentivize them, I think it makes a big difference. Learning to drive in 2022 is miles away from learning how to drive 15 years ago. And I just wanted to implore you to say that we need to put the focus back on the driver. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Okay, so now I'm going to introduce myself. And I'm Anne-Marie Hayes, and a lot of people have mentioned over the course, especially today, of changing driving culture, and that's absolutely crucial. And to do that, we need to provide knowledge, skills, change attitude. And then together, thank you, we will change behavior. And we're at a critical time now for that. Where's the, oh, here. Okay. So 13 years ago, I owned a corporate training company. I had customers that included Sony, Bell, Ticketmaster, and GlaxoSmithKline. I had no interest in driving other than to get in the car to go from point A to point B. Then I had a glass of wine, did not end up with a DUI. No. I had a glass of wine with a friend of mine who's an actuary. And in talking to her, I said to her, so what's my life expectancy now? And she said, well, you're in reasonably good health and a non-smoker. So somewhere around 94 to 95. And I was really shocked. And I said, I'm sure I heard for women, it was more like 78 to 80. She said, well, yeah, that's true if you look at everybody from birth. But once you get past 30, the number goes way up. And I said, well, why 30? And she said, well, there are lots of different reasons. But the biggest reason is because so many teens and young adults make bad choices and risky decisions, and they die too soon. Well, my daughter was 13, so that scared the heck out of me. And I did all kinds of research. And when I got to researching about cars, that's when I realized that if I lose the daughter I love so much, before she's 30, it will almost certainly be in a car. And I just can't have that happen. So I became a driving instructor. I decided that I really needed to understand how we're teaching young people to drive. I went to Humber College, became a driving instructor. I'm certified for in-car and classroom driver instruction. And at the same time, Canadian Tire was opening their driver's academy. A lot of people don't even know they had one, but I was their first and only instructor for a long time. And then I did that for a year. I continued to do a lot of research, and I wrote a book called 3 Keys to Keeping Your Teen Alive, Lessons for Surviving the First Year of Driving. And that really is kind of a manual. It's intended to be kind of a fun book to encourage parental participation, structured practice, and discussions about topics that relate to behavior. I started a company, nonprofit based in Mississauga called Teens Learn to Drive, and developed an event called the Sweet Life Roadshow. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through. It toured all over Ontario to more than 200 high schools and over 90,000 students. Now, COVID hit, we're not traveling anymore. So we changed it up, and we now have a new program that started in September called the Vision Zero Youth Network. And we, in 2021 to 2022 school year, we had 25 high school ambassadors. We started with 25, we ended up with 23, and all over Ontario. Oh, I also serve on a number of committees and things, one of which is the Mississauga Road Safety Committee, and I serve as a member of the Board of Directors for National Organizations for Youth Safety in Washington, D.C. This is a picture from our Sweet Life Roadshow. And you can see that everybody's paying attention. It's highly interactive. Our facilitators are either experts like truckers. We worked with the Ontario Trucking Association, or police officers. But most of them are university students. So very relatable to the teen audience. This is our 2022 Teens Learn to Drive team. Teens Learn to Drive is the group of young people who create resources with me, who deliver social media, and they are completely amazing. They are graphic artists, they are writers, they are videographers, and they are so talented and dedicated. If you want, and you must, want to reach out to your teens in your area, these are some tips for doing it from ages 15 to 24. Social networks are a good way of reaching them, but you must go to them. They will not come to you. So for young people, teens and early 20s, the best way to get them is on TikTok. A little older, Instagram, YouTube. Everybody looks there if they're searching for a topic. Twitter for reaching partners, and Facebook as parents. If you're going to do messaging, it has to be peer-to-peer here. Teens and young adults listen to their peers. The messengers must be diverse. I mean, we want messaging from people who look like us. The messages have to be short. They won't hang in for long. They have to be entertaining. And because you're kind of buying their time, they must be interesting, consistent, and from a trustworthy source. A lot of them aren't. So you must always be trustworthy. Limited reading, because our young audience does not read. And it must be timely. It has to be something they want now. If you want to reach them through activities, must be great messaging from expert sources, peer-to-peer, diverse, interactive, as interactive as you can make it, fun, and music always helps. Better yet, why don't you partner with us and our Vision Zero Youth Network? And we can expand that anywhere and take advantage of what we've been doing for 13 years and our incredible team. So immediately, our video library is available. We have, in fact, I put these out on the tables. This is a bookmark that my team created, and it's 10 inches because that's the minimum distance you must be from the airbag to be protected from it. And there are QR codes that link to 5 videos about how to share the road safely with big trucks, all under 2 minutes. There's a QR code to how to change a tire, how to jumpstart a battery. The recovery position right now is a placeholder, but we will replace that with a video. And then all kinds of personal information. If you have a drug allergy, a pet at home that would need to be attended to, who your emergency contacts are, all that kind of stuff. They're very creative. They're just amazing. Connect with us on social media and during campaigns. We're TL2D, like Teens Learn to Drive, because that sounds way cooler than Teens Learn to Drive, I understand. And TL2D Today. And then spread the word also about a podcast that we're doing for parents. And I'll tell you about that in a second. So for that event called the Sweet Life Roadshow, we had about 12 stations. At one event, we used 10. And each one was 10 minutes long. And so we would divide up the student group into 10 groups, student body, the group that we were working with, into 10 different groups. So they're small groups, 20 students at a time. And highly interactive subjects like pedestrian visibility, drowsy driving is a huge one, why you should wear a seatbelt, those kinds of things. And now we have the Vision Zero Youth Network ambassadors. So their mission that began last year and we're recruiting now for this year is to spread accurate, helpful information on social media about road safety and create useful resources. But we've also taken the elements from that Sweet Life Roadshow and we've pulled 4 of them for the first year. And I'll tell you that in just a second. And they'll be delivered by these teenagers during high school assemblies. Now, we couldn't do it last year because schools were not, even if they were in the building, they were not doing assemblies. But they will be doing it. There, if you want to read this afterwards, these are comments about from young people who belong to it this year and encouraging other people to become a part of it. So what we are offering is like a turnkey solution. We have materials, we have giveaways, and we do training with the young people. The 4 elements that we're providing in 2022 to 2023 in September, October will be pedestrian visibility. And that's about the importance of being alert and aware of your surroundings and wearing reflective surfaces or contrasted clothing, that kind of thing. December, alcohol versus weed, because they don't understand that from a legal perspective, they're the same when it comes to impairment. Drowsy driving, which is huge. And in March, April, we're currently developing a computer game, which is very cool on prom safety. The advantage of doing it this way through young people in the high schools is there are 4 touch points where our event, the Sweet Life Roadshow, was amazing and it was really good. It was one and done. Now this is 4 touch points in the school that are reminders about the importance of making safe choices on the road. And each of these has starts with raising awareness and talking about what the issue is, has an activity, but ends with a workable solution. And the benefits of investing in teens in this way means they'll make better choices, which will reduce crashes and serious injuries and deaths. They'll also take driving more seriously. When you passed a 15-minute test to get a license, it's hard to really understand the responsibility of what that piece of paper means. Then the other thing that is really important is Christine talked about so many changes in the last few years. Well, students go home and tell their parents what they learned. I mean, I've had students come back to me and say, my mom was driving next to a truck and I told her, you either have to speed up or slow down because you cannot stay here. Like, that's the importance, right, of having students go home and talk to their families about what they learned. And keep in mind too, that this is the next generation of parent coaches. So if we don't do something now, things are not going to get better. They're going to get a whole lot worse. I talked about our podcast. It is amazing. It's really good. The number one comment I get from parents is, I think this is really important. I love what you do, but my daughter is so responsible. You know, that's just not enough. And we're not getting that message across. And pretty much everybody you've met has either been on the podcast or will be. And so it's going to take a big effort to get parents involved. And it's going to require a lot of resources to have them understand how important this is. Because once somebody makes a mistake, there's no reset button. You don't get a chance to do it again. It's now or never. We work with a lot of partners, as I mentioned. The one on the right is the one that we did with Peel Police. And we have to start now. We have to work toward continuous improvement. We can't change everything in a day, but we can start somewhere. We need government on board. We need a firm commitment. I would love to see transportation, health, and education work together. I would love to see in high schools physics modules that talk about the difference in a crash at 30 kilometers versus a crash at 80 kilometers. I would love to see, could this car at 90 kilometers an hour navigate that curve? I'd love to see that stuff. In law classes, I mean, there's so much that could be done, but we're not doing any of it. We need to put more emphasis on driver education and improving what's available there. I mean, every course should be like the one Christine offers. And we should have the integration with schools that I just said. We need more incentives for formal education. It's a hell of a business. I mean, kiss your weekends, your nights, every time your family is home, kiss it goodbye if you're going to be a driving instructor. And so it just is a hard business, and we need more incentives for people to become involved. And we need to educate parents. So last thing, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. From Dr. Seuss. So that's everything. And then now we'll take questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. Hi. I told them I was going to ask a question, so I have to. Actually, this one's for Sylvia. You do your presentations in the high schools, and you're pretty blunt, very straightforward. You tell it as it is. One of the things that you didn't comment on is, what is the response of the students to your workshops? And I guess the other question, I guess also the same question to Anne-Marie, is when you're working with the students in the high schools, what is the response, and how much of the eye rolling and the attitude do you get when you're out there working with them?
Go ahead.
So it depends at which point in the presentation. Early on, I get apprehension. They're nervous. They are like, who's this random person coming in to talk to me and tell me that what I enjoy doing on my Friday nights, I shouldn't do anymore. And it takes that conversation and listening to them and understanding why they believe what they believe. Is it because they have two parents that drive high all the time, so their attitude isn't going to be quickly changed? There's all sorts of different reasons why they hold the beliefs that they do. And I think really giving them the space to share that is then what I find the most transformative process. By the end of the session, I have a very high success rate. I'd say I've delivered over 500 workshops in my career, and I would say there's only been a handful of times where I've finished a workshop and had a student who still didn't feel like it was they were convinced. But you know what, at the end of the day, I know I got through with a lot of their peers. And if they have peers that will, now see that side of things, then that's a win. So yeah, it depends at which point in the workshop, but I think hearing what they have to say is going to be the most transformative piece to getting to change that view.
What amazes me is the number of kids who come up afterwards and say, "Oh, thanks. I never knew that. I would never have found that out anywhere else," especially when it comes to things like sharing the road with trucks or seatbelts and airbags. And then other kids who come up and they don't say much while everybody's there, and they'll come up afterwards and tell you something horrible that happened in their family, and that they're so glad that they can keep that from happening to somebody else. So overall, I mean, they really want the information. They don't always know they want the information to begin with. And at one school was funny. We were doing in Woodbridge or something, and the high school, in their brilliance, put up a sign, one of those big signs in front of the school: tomorrow event from Ministry of Transportation about road safety. Well, half the population skipped that day, right? Can you think of anything more boring? So, that kind of thing. You have to be very careful how you present it. But overall, the reception is really excellent.
Yeah, I find another thing too is that sometimes you're giving a voice to a lot of students who feel that way. They feel that there is something wrong with high driving. They feel nervous and apprehensive, but they haven't had much of a culture talking about it. And now they feel like someone's come into the classroom and really allowed that space of, okay, here's what I can say in that situation. It's being talked about. And now the students who are kind of on the fence about standing up to their peers now feel like they're more confident doing so.
So in some of the data we saw, there's I think Robyn talked about this jump after you turn 20 all of a sudden. And to me, being in a university environment, I think, oh, well, that's when people are moving into residence in college and university. So there's been so much focus on high schoolers. Is there anything we can do to kind of continue that education into a time where people are all of a sudden surrounded by just their peers and no parental, daily influence anymore?
Can I answer that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And the best time to do that is during that frosh week. There are lots of opportunities. There are great opportunities to partner with health services and stuff, but it's getting to all of those places and getting the messaging out. And that's a huge job. But if there was more assistance with doing that, there's so much we could do. Because that is very true. And I hear that from young people too, that once they get to university, the drinking culture, the getting high culture, everything changes. And now it's your peer. Your parents aren't telling you anything at all anymore. It's your peers, and nobody wants to be left out. So yeah, I think that's really important. And if people get high, I don't care. If they're drinking, from this perspective, not my business. I don't want them driving. That's the issue. And so I think there's tons more we could do.
I think there's also a disconnect because you do have those teenagers coming out of high school, and that belief of don't drink and drive is firmly ingrained and they will stick with it. But there seems to be a subsection of that demographic where they clearly didn't, which gives us some good insight into, either going back to the drawing board and making sure that we're getting everyone on board as a teen, or not just assuming that because they had the message as a teen that there's no reinforcement of that needed. So I think there's some interesting pieces coming out of that that give us something to work with.
I just wanted to add to that a little bit. So when I see the students face to face, I really try to enforce it or explain to them that this is a lifelong learning event. Like really learning how to drive never ends. We always get better and better with it, and that they really need to buy into that, always getting better, and that they are in charge of making their own decisions. So if we instill that early, that confidence to make their own decisions and to stand up for themselves, that will carry them a long way. And going to COVID, and that we've changed over to online learning rather than face-to-face learning, I feel that I'm missing the boat a lot with a lot of our learners, that I don't get to have those in-depth conversations, and they happen generically in the class where they say this happened to me and this happened to me, and it opens up a discussion. Whereas if it's a PowerPoint presentation and you're just flicking through, we're missing that human element, and that has me very fearful as to what's going to happen.
Yeah, I find one of the issues too is that there's just not an organized structure for that demographic, which is, I think, one of the key issues. I mean, it's easy enough to get into a high school. We know the risk does programming with attendance centers and diversion programming, which is a bit too late. But the point is that like it's those having those structured spaces that I think is a bit of a gap for that age group.
Any other questions?
Two questions. First for Anne-Marie, right at the end of your presentation, you talked about curriculum links. There's a lot of experience tapping into the curriculum and then blending, the topic within there. I've personally, I've seen it done with waste management, water conservation. Is there a strategy that you're thinking about to understand sort of the Ontario curriculum and understand where the fits are, or has that been done?
Oh, I'm familiar with 2 curriculums, but there are over 40 in Ontario. And that is.
I'm talking about the Ministry of Education curriculum.
Yeah, that's what
Okay, I'm sorry.
sorry. Oh, I mean, you mean getting into the high schools and stuff. No, that's something I would love to see. There is no opportunity for that. I mean, it would take the ministries working together, I think, and I would love to see that, but that hasn't happened in my experience.
It's a wonderful idea. It's wonderful. And the second question to the sergeant from Peel Region, please. Is it realistic to think that there could be an enterprise where somebody sets up a race track and have racers go to it, or is that something that's just completely ridiculous? Like that's not what racers want to do.
Nice to have, but financially, I know in the States, somewhere in the States, they actually created that for racers to go and race.
That does actually exist.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. There are 3 or 4 different in Southern Ontario racetracks that do that on certain nights. They will allow amateurs to race. And then there are other groups that will teach them how to properly race. But yeah, it does exist, but it's not the same experience.
No,
they don't take that choice for the most part.
I think it's the thrill seeking and the risk taking is what the draw is.
Yeah,
And the audience.
Yeah. Oh, like, I've pulled up to meets and you'll see fireworks going off. Like it's the whole experience. Like, I guess they want, but yeah, there is some places that they offer that.
In a perfect world, I like that idea though.
It would be safer.
It would
too.
definitely, yeah.
Any other questions? Any online, Navoda? No?
Well, I think we're having a cocktail party after this. So maybe if any shy people want to ask after this, you can ask your questions, because I really hope that people will ask questions, and because there are a lot of questions to ask, and there's a lot that can be done. But we have a lot of doers in this room. So. Go.
As we're talking, I'm just wondering if you can
is there a correlation between drinking and driving and underage drinking to begin with? And the reason I ask the question is I know of many, my kids are no longer teenagers, but many of my kids' friends' parents allowed underage drinking, which fosters a understanding that even though it's not legal, they allowed for it. And therefore, then does that not correlate into you're not allowed to drink and drive, but I allowed you to do this, so why not the other?
There has been research done which looks at age of onset of drinking. So generally at age 14, if you're starting to drink at a young age, you're more likely to engage in a lot of risky behaviors, but impaired driving is one of them. And what's more concerning is the age of onset for males and females used to be different. Young women used to begin drinking at an older age, and it was more males at a younger age. And there in the last, decade, 15 years, there's actually been convergence around the age of onset of drinking. So young women are starting to drink at a young age at the same rate as males, and that's concerning.
Yeah, and I guess the second part to the question is this a parent issue as well then?
I don't know if they have looked
The
at
parents wouldn't think so.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah, well, and keep in mind, it's different looking at the US research because their drinking age is 21. So there are some nuances there.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a hard thing to research because like it's nuanced and there's a difference between allowing drinking to happen and allowing drinking to happen with a fruitful discussion of safety and it's supervised. And so there's so much to that. It's not just like allowing drinking and that's very black and white. It's very complex.
Because there's the allowing the glass of wine with dinner or celebration versus the getting loaded
right.
in the basement.
And there is research to support that sort of parenting can actually instill like a lot of positive, like, I don't know, I guess like lessons on how to use substance safely and cautiously. It's a harm reduction approach, which, has had data to support that it can have positives.
And I don't disagree with your concept and thought process along a glass of wine at dinner as a 16-year-old in your own home is a lot different than a bush party that your parents are allowing you to go to, knowing there's going to be drinking.
Yeah.
That's an entirely different thing.
Yeah, of course.
So it still comes down to parenting.
Yes, it's definitely a parent issue. I think we can all agree for sure. Having a space where parents can have that conversation and feel more comfortable to, hear their kids out on why they're making decisions that they do and what their perspectives are, I think is really going to be the source of dismantling a lot of those misconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
Is the industry regulated? Is the driving instruction industry regulated in Ontario?
It is. The Ministry of Transportation is our overseeing body, and they will approve the curriculums and they do regulatory inspections. But the inspections are really just, ticking boxes. Do you have signatures? You have, are all the training hours completed? It's really the quality of the training hours that make the difference.
Right. So it's not, is there something more to be done with the regulation? Would you like to be, would the industry like to have more regulation?
I don't know if it's more regulation or maybe it's the quality of regulation. It needs to be looked at. So to making sure that there's meat on the bones, so to speak, that it's not just ticking a bunch of boxes of they've completed 10 hours type of thing.
And so does the driving instructor industry have an association? It must have.
Once upon a time, we had the Driving School Association of Ontario, which unfortunately has disbanded. So I'm personally a member of the Driving School Association of the Americas, which I find there's a lot of support in the United States for small independent driving schools, which we can't find here in Ontario.
Yeah, they have that. Let's see. And I'm afraid that's all the questions we can take.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Did you see my text?
Is there a slideshow as well? No, just the video. Just the video. Okay. Okay, speak and when you're ready. Okay, I know everybody's anxious to get to the next part of it, and everybody's getting kind of thirsty, no doubt. But as the conference comes to a close, on behalf of the board of directors, I would like to thank each and every one of you for attending and participating in this year's CARS conference. It's great to get back together in person again. I think over the last couple of years anyway, we've missed the opportunity to meet in person, to have those little side conversations, ask those questions we might be a little shy about asking in public. But it leads to different collaborations, new ideas, and more research and more programming that just you can't do online very easily. I thank each and every one of you for coming and participating in the event. And at the same time, the hybrid nature of the event, this year's event, we're getting used to that idea. And I think it's important that we were able to do that so that not only we can get together, but we can also share with other people who can't necessarily come to the event. And just attending the various sessions over the past few days, we've had people from long distances be able to be in the room with us by video and present us with their research, their ideas, and their programs, which I think is really unique. And I appreciate the opportunity to do that, for them to be able to share with us and for us to be able to share with them. At this time, I'm excited to announce the location of next year's conference. We're partnering with the Canadian Institute of Transportation Engineers, or CITE, C-I-T-E, to bring you a joint conference in Winnipeg from June 4th to 7th, 2023. Mark that down on your calendars, June 4th to 7th. The theme is road safety, creating impact through diversity. This theme was chosen to enhance safety, sustainability, and equity in transportation in the face of complex and competing priorities in a rapidly changing environment through a multidisciplinary approach. A call for abstracts will be released in the fall, and once again, we're inviting a broad array of road safety topics. I would now like to show you a short promo video.
Hey, yo, we are not, yeah, hey, yeah.
Okay, just a final couple of notes here. Want to remind everyone about the young professionals and the young at heart are having a networking cocktail hour for people of all ages in the Georgian room starting at 5 o'clock. That's in about 15 minutes. Refreshments and appetizers will be available. Everyone is welcome. There's also the CARS OTC Symposium on Vision Zero tomorrow at this hotel. Thank you. Safe travels. We'll see you next year.
I just want to say something. Before you all leave, I think we need to thank a few people as well that have worked extra hard this week. And I'd like to recognize Brenda, Navoda, and Mike. Without them, we would have just been floundering around. Thank you.